Hey everyone, this is Chuck here. We're going to move into module 2 here, and this first section is going to be a little bit longer. I apologize for that, but my sense is it's going to be a pretty important section on the test from every indication I feel and that I'm getting here. So, again, just as a reminder, disclaimer perhaps, but doing this to help practice, preparation for the exam myself. I'd like to teach it someday, so of course I want to practice that way, and I want to share it at the same time too, so it potentially can help you and help you refine some of what you're learning at the same time too. So we're certainly not using any of the ASCM PowerPoints, and this is strictly a Chuck opinion piece. So the header, if you step back a couple notes before we get started, preparing for supply chain transformation. And specifically section A, select supply chain transformation drivers. So what we're looking at there, if we're going to start putting together this transformation plan, we really want to make sure that the plan not indicates, but the plan steers us towards where we want to go, so that future state of where we want to be becomes really important, because our plan's got to move us in that direction. So it's got to be very planful. So what it means then, when we're selecting the drivers, what's pushing us to change and why, those are those things that we're working towards. So we look at those different areas like macroeconomics, legal and regulatory, market characteristics, etc. So we got a lot of them to look at. And I think what I'll take for an approach here also is mention the topic, take a quick pause, and I'll probably read a couple of the sentences from each section just so you see what the main themes are and you can think about why they're driving you. I also made myself a note. I came back afterwards and highlighted. I said, this is where I should do a deeper dive into the SCORE DS model and the digital capabilities model for myself as I prepare for the test. And that seems to be something very important, both topically, because of course that is part of what our transformation frameworks are, and we want to be getting towards the digital in the future. But getting some feedback from folks already is that they found this to be an important part as well. So I think it's an area here, module 2, section A, well, the whole module, that we look at really serious here. So let's dive in. We're looking at what are some of the drivers that are pushing us to change and where we need to get to. So it's not just pushing to change, but where we need to get to. Macroeconomics, okay? The analysis of supply and demand in aggregate, collective behavior of economic actors across an entire economy. It's something you and I can't affect, but we are seriously affected by it. And so macroeconomics to me seems to be important because we need to have supply chains and businesses that are reacting to these changing conditions and changing economics we see in this day and age. A second one certainly to think about is legal and regulatory landscape. So I didn't see anything specific in the participant guide myself, but I think of things like the EU's coming out with their CSRD, their sustainability directives. We're seeing regulation coming out in terms of tariffs in each of our different countries and that stuff. And so we're affected by those legal and regulatory items, and we need to be prepared to operate in those environments. Geopolitically is the third one. Again, nothing specific written on it, but we see many of the geopolitical tensions we all face around the world, and being able to sell into those markets, operate in those markets, things like that. They're certainly going to be impacted by what's going on politically and geographically. A fourth one is industry and market characteristics. And let me read the statement here. In order to remain competitive, organizations must adapt to changing conditions within their industry and market, or risk losing competitive advantage. And so I think that says it all. If we want a shot at succeeding and being around, then we've got to figure out how we're going to adapt to those things. So there could be disruptive technologies, market characteristics and conditions may change, new competition, need to be prepared for those things. Okay. This is an area, it wasn't in this section, but the tools of PESTLE, P-E-S-T-L-E, and STEEPLE, S-T-E-E-P-L-E, definitely apply here. So look them up. PESTEL stands for political, economic, social, ethical, technological, legislative, environmental. Steeple's pretty close to the same. The idea being is we're going to ask questions, what's going on in those areas to fully inform us. So worth looking up those two. Fifth one, voice of the customer and voice of the process. I've heard of voice of customer before. I've not heard a voice of the process, although I like it, definitely. And so let me read what it says here. The voice of the customer is a tool from quality function deployment, which is the house of quality, by the way, closes the gap between what the customer wants and what they get, can lead to powerful insights. So fundamentally, we're asking the customer, what do you want? And then for each one of those, what do we want? We're going to solve for each one of them on the vertical. When you look at the chart, how we're going to solve that. And we're going to look at where things bump into each other and try to solve those ahead of time so we don't compromise what the customer wants. But it's also a tool that forces you and I to really listen to what the customer wants and connect it to how we're going to solve it. It's also a process that can be used internally as well. Instead of the external customer, it's who's your internal customer. What do they want from you as an output of your process? Very similar to SIPOC, SIPOC, if you look that up in Six Sigma. But what does your internal customer want? And then for each one of those, we have to solve it with an element of the process that makes that happen. So the other one that was new was the voice of the process, refers to the capability of the process. So when you do statistics and we do control charts, we talk about CP and CPK. And so we talk about the capability of the process, CP, and the acceptability, which is CPK. So CP is saying, is the process based on the sampling, which hopefully is representative of the population, but does that sample look like our whole population is able to meet the print? Now, what they call acceptable, what they call acceptable in the book is what I grew up with is the process centered. We can be capable of meeting what the customer wants, but we're shifted away from the average. And so we may not be capable of meeting the print and we have to adjust the process. And the example I would talk about there for you would be, think about a product where you're filling a bag like sugar and you promise 5 pounds or 5 kilograms per bag. You may overfill it and you're within spec and you think that's okay to ship to the customer. But of course, we may overfill the bag and that could create problems for the customer, but they're not going to complain about getting more. But you should still look at the acceptability or being centered, because if you're shipping way out here, you're shipping more sugar, but you're charging back here at the average. And so you're giving away product for free. And so we should be centered and capable. So the next one, the sixth one, strategic imperatives. And I think this is where the digital capability model should come in, and we should take a good look at that as we're doing our studying individually. So here's what it says. Industry 4.0 is defined by the dictionary as a concept of organizational and technological changes along with value chain integrations and new business models development driven by customer needs and mass customization enabled by innovation technologies, connectivity, and information technology integration. That was a couple breath sentence, no doubt. And the question is, what the heck does that mean? What we're somewhat talking about in my interpretation tends to be in the area of, look, I go back to this sentence all the time. We're trying to synchronize our supply chain from customer all the way back to the suppliers. And if we want to synchronize, we're going to have to be able to have visibility of everything going on across that supply chain. And to have that visibility, we're going to need to start building and utilizing technology and technological features to connect that all together. So the customer is got more flexibility and an opportunity. We've got the same, suppliers do. And the digital capabilities model gives us good insight into what are those areas along the supply chain that the various players are looking for technologically or should look for technologically, so we can integrate technologically across the supply chain. In that sense, it's something very strategic. It defines the company and our marketplace, should be an imperative, because if we're going to exist into the future, technology has to be part of our solution if we're going to operate outside of our very localized area there. And even then, there's benefits by having technology at a local level. So that's why we're calling it strategic imperative. So for me, I'm going to be going back and looking at the digital capabilities model and tackling that area out there. All right, seventh area, sustainability. Imperatives not only for compliance, but also for business success. No question, it's of increasing importance to the customer, and they're starting to be willing to pay more for it, but they expect it also. We're also seeing it as employees. Employees are saying, look, I don't want to work for a company that isn't sustainable or it's harming the environment or the society or the economics. So it's front and center today in what you and I have to do, and that has to be part of our supply chain in the future. Okay. They make a comment within there real quick. They talk about the voice of the employee. So the voice of the employee looks to capture the needs and requirements of the individual employee in the workplace. So sustainability is part of that voice. And if we don't heed it, we're going to struggle to have employees. If we don't heed it and deal with it appropriately, we're not going to have customers either. Digitization, kind of a repeat on strategic imperatives. Going back to strategic imperatives, certainly digitization is one of them. But there could be other reasons strategically we want to move into areas because of disruptive change, opportunities, whatever. But here we go a little bit deeper in digitization. Digital transformation of supply chain needs to be end-to-end, analytic, and oriented towards a vision. The supply chain must transform completely from the initial suppliers to the end user to remain competitive and relevant. So it says it right there, everybody. We don't do it, we're going to be in trouble. Okay. So a couple more sections and then we're done here. Ninth section in terms of this drivers conversation is process and performance metrics. We're setting metrics, we're building processes to meet those metrics. But if you step back, the metric itself isn't a driver, but the metric is a window on what the customer or the outcome participant or whomever wants. So we're setting up metrics to measure what the voice of the customer wants or the process, whatever. If we identify those customers or processes as strategically important to us, then they become a strategic driver. So it's picking the metrics and building out the processes that allow us to achieve those metrics is what's strategic here. And a comment on the process side, when you think about it, think about your experiences as a consumer and how many times processes don't work out well. And as a customer, you're not too thrilled with the outcome. So there's lots of opportunities to improve. And I think I find myself at times wondering, do businesses even care enough to improve and change the process and take the risk of being good at their processes? Because they just aren't happening, and yet customers are still buying from them. So I think there's a huge strategic opportunity improving our processes. Last one, benchmarking. It's going out and looking at what others do in areas of interest to you where you want to improve. So we're finding those who are best in class, best in an area, best in process, seeing if we can learn from them how they do it so we can come back and go, how does that help inform what we do, and what do we want to change that makes sense for our business out there? To do that, of course, we've got to know where we're at today, our maturity level. We need to recognize where that benchmark company is that we're going to go visit and go out there and learn from them what they're doing. Lots of tools out there from Gartner and digital capabilities models and everything. But one of the other challenges that when we go and benchmark is prioritizing which one we want to go after first to redesign, what's going to give us the biggest bang for the dollar or whatever the currency is, which ones are most strategically important. We're going to prioritize all these things we need to do based on various criteria. Those big ones, the first ones on the list, are the ones we're going to benchmark as well as we go through that. So those are the areas. And I'm going to bring this back up. Bear with me for a half sec here. I want to show you this. This is why I think this is an important area. I'm just going to put this up on the screen here, so you can see from the note standpoint what happened to me. Just for these 10 areas, I wrote, pages worth of notes. So I'm not sure where I put this little monster. You can see it. You can kind of see the outline here for a second. In fact, let me do this. Let me come up here and take off the blur for a second. So let's take that off so you can see it here, certainly. But you can see, for these 10 areas, here's one set of notes that I found myself taking. And then I went into page 2, and I ended up with additional notes that I found myself writing as far as building this out towards the exam content manual. And then I had a 3rd page. And then I ended up having a 4th page as you look through it. And then I started moving into a 5th page up on top here. The reason I'm showing you all those and the reasons I want you to think about all those is because this is a section that seemed very full of what was going on in terms of what's to be known about the topic. So take section A very serious. They're all serious, of course, but especially that one. There's a lot going on in there, and it's central to what we're trying to learn here as part of passing the certification for those of us who are going to be teaching it. Certainly our learners are going to be looking a lot in those areas to learn from you and I, so they can take that back to work. So I think it becomes a really important section for you and I.